Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Appreciate you guys coming back. If you're new to the channel, thanks for coming and checking it out. Today's video, we have a super frightening encounter that happened in the Marble Mountain wilderness up on a remote alpine lake to a young lady that was all by herself. She was backpacking and hiking on the Pacific Coast Trail, and she found an area to stay for the night. And wait until you guys hear what happened. Oh my goodness. Now what I did is I went and found some audio to add to this to make it more immersive for you guys, so you guys can maybe close your eyes when I'm reading the story, put yourself in that situation. Now this audio was not recorded by this lady. Don't want to give you that impression. It was something else I found online, but I'm just going to add it to it just to add to the story to help you guys feel more involved and more immersive in it. Alright, let's get to it. BFRO reports number 22434, Siskiyou, California, August 1998. In 1998, I was backpacking by myself in the Marble Mountain wilderness in the Klamath National Forest the third week of August. The Klamath and the Marbles are a particularly rugged and steep terrain. I hiked from Etna Summit at the PCT trailhead and looped all the way through the Woolly Creek drainage, attempting to get to the Cal Salmon River. My attempt failed, and I hiked to Little Elk Lake and out to the group of lakes outside of Lover's Camp trailhead for the full distance. On day one, I hiked over 14 miles on the Pacific Coast Trail south from Etna Summit. On day two, I left the PCT and hiked to a large marble outcropping ledge above the Woolly Creek drainage below, a large unnamed peak. The night of my second day out, I slept on this nice marble ledge beside a small creek about 2 foot wide that was more than an ice drainage from the steep glacial peak above. The creek ran down the ledge and off a cliff that is about 200 feet drop to a boulder field below, and about 800 feet or more down to the Woolly Creek drainage. The 200-foot cliff below the ledge is very steep, and a traditional climber would be rated at least a 5.9 or 5.10 Chauncey climb. So there I was in my purple marmot bag, all cozy and tucked in. The night was clear, and it was about 4 days before the full moon in late August, so it was bright. I was sleeping parallel to the little brook running along the marble ledge and about 15 feet from its banks. I fell asleep and woke up to a weird noise that was very far away. I was already frightened of animals because I was all by myself. It does not matter, but I am also a female. I was scared out there by myself, but having the time of my life. The noise seemed so far away, seemed to be way down in the forest in the Woolly Creek drainage. It was loud, however, almost like a yelling or whooping. It was consistent and occurred one yell after the other. I didn't worry too much and was not concerned because it was so far away. The yelling truly happened one after the other, and it was getting louder and perhaps closer. I still was not concerned, as it was far enough and I was atop a huge cliff, so I felt safe and unreachable. However, the yelling got louder and closer yet. It started to travel up the boulder field below. At this point, I had heard the yelling for 20 minutes. Again, it was a consistent howl or whoop over and over again. I just laid still in my bag and realized that not only was this yelling thing was coming up the boulder field, but coming up the cliff. Sure enough, the creature was climbing up the cliff, and fast. The whole event was this thing running and hooting, inward drone yelling up the drainage, up and up to the cliff and beyond to the top of the peak. Sure enough, when it got to the cliff, it pulled and climbed itself up swiftly and agile, as I put in my journal. It literally dynoed every move on this 5.9 cliff and yanked itself up the cliff to the top where the ledge was, where I was. This creature in the meantime was still consistently calling, yelling, hooting. It got to the ledge and started running towards the peak above. As it got close, I pretty much urinated in my sleeping bag, but I just laid still. I was extremely frightened. As it started to approach the ledge close to where I was, on the other side of the brook, I could see it. It was a silhouette of a huge running gorilla. It ran on two legs but dragged and pulled with its arms. It was huge. The arms were almost the length of half of its body, covered in hair. It was black, but I only really saw a silhouette. The head reminded me of the abominable snowman from the Christmas Rudolph movie. It just ran and howled, but then suddenly stopped slightly when it was parallel to me. It stopped howling and slowed down slightly and kind of hesitated. It turned its head towards me as if smelling something, and then immediately turned forward and really started running up faster and louder and faster, and then climbed up to the top of the peak and called for nearly 4 hours straight. Until almost sunrise. I stayed awake the whole time. I got up the next day and entered a short entry in my journal and packed up and continued on my journey. Crazy. Could you imagine that? Being out there in the wilderness like that by yourself, up on some mountain, like lonely peak around some lake, and hearing that from far away, and then it just, man. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read you the follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator Brandon Keel. Now, he goes into a lot more depth because, he interviews her and gets more detail. So what I did was I went on Google Earth for hours and hours and hours. Believe me, it was a long time, scouring all these lakes in the Wooley Creek drainage. Now, there's a bunch, but there's only a few that meet the criteria of the clues in the story, and I've narrowed those down to 2 myself. Now, I'm not saying that I'm right, because I can't really narrow it down to an exact lake, but according to the criteria in the story, these 2 are, to me, the most likely. Now, I want you guys to leave me some comments below. Let me know which one of these 2 lakes, or if you think it's a different lake, let me know which lake you think it is. Now, I showed you the first lake when I was telling you her story. Now I'm going to show you the second lake as I tell you the investigator's report. So let's check it out. I spoke with the witness for roughly 2 hours, and despite the incident being almost 10 years ago, she was still very detailed and emotional. In the years before the incident, she and friends would go to this area on the weekends, so she was very familiar and felt comfortable here. During this time, she was working for the Forest Service, and on her time off would hike the lesser-known spots of the area. At the time of this incident, she had decided to solo hike about 100 miles of the Pacific Coast Trail, and had set out on a route when she noticed a small lake on the map she wanted to visit. On the second day of the hike, she made her way 5 miles off the Pacific Coast Trail to the small lake and decided to set up camp for the night. The lake was towered over by a peak that rose roughly 1,500 feet. From the base of the peak, about 1,000 feet up, was an outcropping that she described as being completely flat, 50 yards in length and 200 feet in width. The lake is situated below this in a meadow that ends in a cliff that is roughly 200 feet tall and descends at a 90-degree angle. The base of this cliff was strewn with rocks shed by the cliff face, and then it opens up into a drainage. After exploring the area a little, she decided to set up her camp on the outcropping away from the lake, as she had seen numerous bear sign and didn't want any trouble as she slept. After eating dinner and settling in, she went to sleep at around 8 p.m. She states that the moon was almost full and very bright. At about midnight, she was awakened by a loud but very faint wailing that was coming from about 2 miles deep in the drainage area. She said that the wailing was consistent and repetitive, and about 1 call every 2 seconds. As she lay awake listening, she could hear that gradually the sound was getting louder and louder, moving at a higher rate of speed in her direction. At this point, she wasn't overly concerned, as there was a cliff and the peak face between her and the animal. She states she was very confident that whatever was making the noise would not be able to climb the cliff that the meadow overlooked. After about 30 minutes of nonstop calling, she was able to clearly hear the animal's approach. She stated that it was obviously, definitely bipedal. There was no doubt in my mind that this was something very large running at a high rate of speed on two legs with a tremendous lung capacity. Shortly thereafter, she heard what sounded like rocks being overturned in addition to the wailing and running, and she realized that the animal was ascending the rock field at the base of the cliff. That was followed by the sound of the animal pulling itself up the cliff face at a good pace. The wailing was mixed with the grunts and the gasps of the steep ascent. It was at this point that she involuntarily urinated in her sleeping bag due to fright. She said she was overcome with the notion that somehow this animal knew she was there and was coming for her, seeking her out. The reporter made her way to the edge of the outcropping and was able to see the animal breach the cliff, slow to catch his breath, begin the wailing again, and then start running through the meadow straight for the base of the peak. She described the animal's silhouette as looking like a large, lean gorilla-human mix. It was very much upright with a slight bend forward. The shoulders were broad and wide. The head was close to the shoulders with no real neck being visible. The knees were at a 45-degree angle. The arms were extremely long and very muscular. She saw a hair of about 3 inches in length moving as it ran. She stated that as it ran, the animal was stooped over and using its arms to help propel itself forward, almost as if it was using them to run faster. She made her way back to her sleeping bag and felt the only thing she could do was to get inside and try to be as small, still, and quiet as possible. At this point, the animal is still wailing and she could hear it begin to climb the peak. After only a few minutes, it reached the outcropping she was on, pulled herself up. It was about 25 feet away from her. The animal seemed to be a bit out of breath and briefly stopped its wailing. Seemingly still not aware of her, it hesitated, smelled the air for a few seconds, and then turned to look at her. It appeared to be stunned and caught off guard by her presence. She said that after only a few seconds, it screamed again, much louder. And then continued straight up the peak much faster than she had seen it before. The animal continued its cries, and it climbed the peak, and once making it to the top, she felt, it settled itself and then began to make a different call, much louder, lower in registry, and very deliberate. By now it was about 2 a.m. She stated that the animal continued to call over and over and over until about 5:30 a.m. She sat awake the entire night listening to it, not able or wanting to sleep. At about 5:30 a.m., the animal stopped, and she felt it must have descended the opposite side. She never heard it leave. The witness waited until first light and then packed her gear and left the area. She said she never heard the animal again. She also says she never heard anything in response to the animal's calls. She felt the animal was definitely male, as she could not see any breast, but did note a broad, thick chest. I feel very much that the witness had this encounter, and that she is telling the truth. She came off as being very genuine, sincere, detailed, and forthright. What do you guys think about that? Wow. Imagine that. Imagine being out there all by yourself, a young lady, heck, even a young man, out there all by themselves on one of them lonely peaks. Hear something far away that you don't know what it is, something strange, and it gets closer and closer. You think you're safe up on a cliff. All of a sudden, it's climbing the cliff, coming towards you. Man, I mean, obviously she was very scared because she urinated in her sleeping bag. But you know what? I challenge any of you guys out there, or gals, to tell me that you wouldn't be scared also in that situation. You would be urinating in your sleeping bag also, most likely. And especially when it came up on the ledge that she was on, when it was going up to the peak. Wow. I mean, I just can't even imagine that. Unbelievable to think about. Alright, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to grow this channel, and it's because of you guys that I'm able to do that. So until next time, make sure you always remember, where there is WILLSTAR, there is a way. We'll see you guys later. Take care.